You can get used to being alone. 15 years in the Montana high country will teach you that. It'll teach you to read the snow like a book, to hear a storm coming on the wind, to feel the quiet before a predator strikes. But there's one thing you never get used to. You never get used to being hunted. My name is Bram Caldwell. Folks down in the flatlands, the few who remember me, they call me Grizzly Bram. They think it's because I'm big or because I live where the great bears walk. They're wrong. They call me that because 15 years ago, I was cornered, and I fought back. I survived. And in this world, sometimes surviving is the worst crime of all. The wind coming into Cedar Flats that February felt personal. It was a mean wind, the kind that finds the smallest tear in your coat and sticks a knife in. I had my mule, Silas, loaded with 3 months of prime beaver and fox pelts, enough for powder, lead, salt, and coffee. A man needs coffee. It's the one thing the mountains can't give you. I kept my head down. In a town like this, whispers follow a man like me. I was a ghost, a story they told their kids to make them behave. The man who killed a judge. The man who ran to the mountains instead of the gallows. They had the story half right. I ran, but I never killed that judge. The truth, however, was a currency nobody in Cedar Flats traded in. That's when I saw her. In the alley beside Hutchinson's general store, there was movement. My hand went to the Colt at my hip, a habit as natural as breathing. But it wasn't a threat. It was a girl, maybe 20 years old, digging through the trash heap. She was desperate. You could see it in the way she moved, quick and furtive, like a doe at a salt lick. Her dress was the color of a faded bruise, and she wore no coat. In this cold, that wasn't just poverty, it was a death sentence. Her hands were raw, split open and bleeding. She found a heel of old bread, hard as a rock, and wrapped it in a scrap of burlap like it was a king's treasure. Something in my chest, a gear that had been rusted shut for 15 years, groaned and turned. I walked closer. The sound of my boots on the frozen mud made her spin around, pressing herself flat against the wall. Her eyes. Man, her eyes. They were green, sharp, and shattered like a broken bottle. She was ready to fight or fly, and I knew in that instant she was more dangerous than any cornered animal because she had nothing left to lose. I reached into my coat, not for the Colt, for the leather pouch heavy with gold dust from my trapline. 3 months of work, enough to see me through the spring thaw. The words came out of my mouth before I could think, rough from disuse. "Can I buy you?" I saw a dozen emotions flash across her face. Shock, fury, and then a dark, bitter humor that told me she'd heard worse. Her voice, when it came, was as steady and cold as Riverstone. "You can't afford my freedom." The words hit me harder than a fist. I hadn't meant it like that. I meant, hell, I don't know what I meant. A meal, a moment of warmth. But she'd heard the world's truth in my clumsy question. Everything has a price, especially people. "I meant no disrespect," I said, putting the pouch away. "There's a place down the street, Murphy's, hot stew for 15 cents. I looked at her bleeding hands. "It's good for a cold day." She studied me, those sharp green eyes trying to read the sign. "Why?" "Because I know what hungry feels like," I said. It was the simple truth. "And because you look like someone who's running. I know that too." A flicker of something in her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. One runner to another. "The men looking for me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They don't give up." "Neither do grizzlies," I said. "I'm still here." That almost got a smile. Almost. She pushed herself off the wall, a decision made in a heartbeat. She was tired of running, tired of freezing, tired of being hungry. Maybe she just wanted one last hot meal before the end. 15 cents, she said. My treat. But as we walked toward that smoky diner, I had a feeling, cold and sharp as the wind itself, that this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of mine, and that the price of that bowl of stew was going to be more than either of us could imagine. Murphy's Eating House was a squat, ugly building that smelled of stale beer and desperation. I held the door for her, and I noticed she immediately put her back to the wall, choosing a table in the corner where she could watch the entrance. She was smart. She was a survivor. It made me wonder what exactly she was surviving. 2 stews, I told the kid, wiping down the counter. And coffee. Hot. We sat in silence. Up close, I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the aristocratic set of her jaw. She'd tried to smudge dirt on her cheeks to hide it, but this was a woman who came from something better than digging through trash. Trouble had a way of finding women like that. Ada, she said suddenly, her voice low. Ada Merritt. Bram Caldwell. I know who you are, she said, not looking at me. Everyone knows Grizzly Bram. They say you killed a judge. They say a lot of things, I said, stirring my coffee. She leaned forward, her green eyes boring into me. Did you? I met her gaze. No. The stew came. It was thick, hot, and probably made of venison, though with Murphy you never knew. Ada ate like she was trying to hide how hungry she was, taking small, careful bites, but her hands trembled slightly. I looked away, giving her the dignity of the moment, and that's when the door banged open. 3 men strode in. They wore city clothes but were trying their damnedest to look like hard men of the frontier. It was a bad fit. The man in the lead had a scar that twisted his mouth into a permanent sneer, and his eyes were the color of a frozen pond, pale and dead. His gaze swept the room, dismissive, until it landed on Ada. She froze, utterly and completely still, a rabbit under the shadow of a hawk. Well, well, Scarmouth said, his voice slick with false charm. Miss Merritt, you've led us quite a chase. I don't know you, Ada said, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her spoon. Oh, I think you do, he said, moving closer, his 2 goons fanning out to cut off any escape. You knew Samuel Braresland, didn't you? Worked for him, right before his unfortunate accident. Braresland, the territorial assessor. I'd heard he'd taken a fall down some stairs a few weeks back. An accident. Yeah, right. I was his housekeeper, Ada said, her voice tight. I don't know anything about his business. That's funny, Scarmouth purred, leaning over our table. Because the night he died, you disappeared, along with his private strongbox, a box that contained some very important papers. I shifted in my seat. Just a small movement, but it was enough. Scarmouth's dead eyes swiveled to me. This doesn't concern you, Mountain Man. The lady's trying to eat her stew in peace, I said, my voice quiet. My hand was resting on the table, inches from the Colt. The lady is a thief and a murderer. That's a strong accusation, I said. You got a warrant? His eyes narrowed. We don't need papers to collect what belongs to our employer. Then you don't need her, I said. The room went silent. You could have heard a snowflake land. The kid behind the counter had vanished into the kitchen. Smart boy. One of Scarmouth's men, a jumpy kid, let his hand drift toward his coat. Don't, I said, without looking at him. I kept my eyes locked on the leader. Whatever you're being paid, it isn't enough to die for. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. Like the fact that your friend there is carrying his gun in a shoulder rig. He's got to clear his coat to draw. That takes time. Time he doesn't have. I flicked my eyes to him, then back. Or the fact that you're standing with the window behind you makes for a real nice silhouette. My gaze shifted to the table. Or the fact that Miss Merritt here has her hand on that coffee pot, and hot coffee in the face can ruin a man's aim something awful. Ada's hand had indeed moved to the pot. She hadn't even realized she'd done it. Instinct. Scarmouth wasn't stupid. He was calculating the odds. Him and his 2 boys against a man who looked like he'd been carved out of the mountain itself, and a desperate woman with a pot of boiling coffee. He took a step back. This isn't over. It usually isn't, I said. They backed out of the diner, slow and deliberate, trying to save face. Through the window, I watched them gather on the street, arguing, pointing, planning. Back door, I said to Ada. Now. She didn't hesitate. We moved through the greasy kitchen, past the scared-looking cook. I threw enough coins on the counter to cover the meal and the trouble. The alley led to the stables. My mare Gray Ghost was there, along with Silas. She was an ugly horse, but tough as boiled leather. They'll be watching the roads out of town, Ada said, her voice shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. We're not taking the roads, I said, throwing my saddle on the mare. I looked at her. The choice was hers. You can take your chances here, or you can come with me. She looked back toward the street, then at the jagged line of the mountains against the sky. What's your price? The question hung in the cold air. 15 years I'd lived alone. 15 years I hadn't asked for a thing from anyone. No price, I said. Just an offer. I've got a cabin up past Devil's Elbow. It's warm, it's safe, and it's damn hard to find. You can stay till this blows over. In exchange for what? She pressed, her green eyes searching my face for the lie. I thought for a moment. Company, I suppose. It's been a long time since I talked to anyone but my mule, and he's a terrible conversationalist. That got the smile, the first real one I'd seen. It changed her whole face, chasing the shadows away for a second. That's all. That's all, I said. Your freedom, like you said. Can't afford it. Wouldn't want to. She made her decision. She swung up behind me on the mare, her arms going around my waist. She was light as a bird. As the first heavy flakes of snow began to fall, we rode out the back of the stables. They won't give up, she whispered against my back. Men like that, they're paid too well. Maybe, I said, urging the mare toward the high trail. But first they have to find us. Behind us, Cedar Flats was swallowed by the storm. Ahead the mountains waited, patient, silent, deadly. And somewhere in the swirling white, I could hear the sound of hoofbeats. They were already coming. The chase had begun. The trail to my cabin isn't a trail. It's a memory, a series of landmarks only I know. A lightning-scarred pine, a peculiar rock formation that looks like a sleeping bear, the place where the creek runs underground for 50 yards. The snow was a blessing, covering our tracks within minutes, but the storm was also a killer. Ada held on behind me, not saying a word. I could feel her shivering, a fine tremor that went right through my buffalo coat. The cold was sinking its teeth into her. There's a way station ahead, I shouted over the wind. A lean-to. We can wait out the worst of it. She just tightened her grip, smart, saving her breath. The way station was nothing more than 3 walls and a roof, but it broke the wind. I had a cache of dry wood stacked there, a habit of planning ahead that had saved my skin more than once. I had a fire roaring in minutes. Ada was already seeing to the horses, her movements efficient despite the chattering of her teeth. She knew her way around animals, another point in her favor. Where'd you learn to handle horses? I asked, handing her a tin cup of hot pine needle tea from my pack. My father, she said, her voice tight. He raised them. Before, she trailed off. Before he died. There was a whole world of pain in that one word. Everyone in the territories had a before, a life they'd lost, a dream that had died. I didn't push. I pulled out some pemmican and hardtack. She ate without complaint. Those men, I said, staring into the fire, they work for the Hancock Mining Syndicate. Her head snapped up, those green eyes sharp again. What makes you say that? The one with the scar, his boots, fancy silver tips, fancy stitching. Saw a pair just like 'em on a company man in Helena last year. That's not hired gun money. That's a bonus for a special job. She was quiet for a long time. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind. Samuel Bereslin wasn't just my employer, she said finally. He was a good man, and he was the territorial assessor for mineral rights. I let out a low whistle. With the silver fever sweeping Montana, that was a job worth killing for. He found something, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Discrepancies, forged deeds, claims filed in the names of dead men. He was building a case against the Hancock Syndicate, against Josiah Hancock himself. Her hand tightened on her cup. He kept copies of everything, his private papers. The night he fell, I took them, all of them. And now they want them back, I said. They want me dead, she corrected. The papers are just a bonus. I'm the only living witness to what he found. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the swirling snow. The world outside our little shelter was a white, howling fury. Why didn't you go to the law? The marshals? She gave a bitter laugh. The territorial judge, Carlton Frost, he's in Hancock's pocket. The local sheriffs? Most of them are on the payroll. I didn't know who to trust, so I ran. She had been running for 3 weeks, town to town, selling off her belongings one by one until she had nothing left. Cedar Flats was the end of the line. I looked at her, huddled by the fire. The dirt and desperation couldn't hide the steel in her spine. She was a survivor, but surviving was about to get a whole lot harder. Because as the storm began to ease, I heard something else on the wind. Faint but unmistakable. A dog baying. Not a wolf. A hound. A tracking hound. They hadn't just followed us. They had brought a professional tracker. And a dog's nose doesn't care about the snow. Ada heard it too. The color drained from her face. They found us. Not yet, I said, kicking snow onto the fire. But they're closing in. I grabbed my rifle. The lean-to wasn't defensible. We had to move. Now. We had to climb. Get to higher, rougher ground where a horse and a dog would be a liability. Can you climb? I asked her. She looked up at the jagged peaks, barely visible through the snow. Then she looked back in the direction of the baying hound. I can do whatever I have to, she said, and I believed her. But I had a cold feeling in my gut. These weren't just hired thugs anymore. A tracker with a hound meant they were serious, deadly serious. They weren't just trying to get the papers back. They were hunting, and they wouldn't stop until we were buried under 100 feet of snow in silence. We left the horses. It felt like cutting off a limb, but they couldn't make the climb I had in mind. I slapped my mare on the rump, sent her running west, a false trail for them to follow. Maybe it would buy us an hour, maybe less. The climb was brutal. The air thinned, burning our lungs. Every step was a battle against the wind and the deep, clinging snow. I broke trail, packing down the snow with my weight, Ada following in my footsteps, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She never complained. Not once. She just kept climbing, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on my back. I'd glance back, and even through the exhaustion, I could see that fire in her. The fire of a woman who had decided not to be a victim anymore. We were heading for a place I called the Needle's Eye, a narrow pass between two sheer rock faces, barely wide enough for a man to walk through. It was the only way onto the ridge above my valley. Defensible. But getting there was hell. The baying of the hound grew closer, echoing off the canyon walls. It was a relentless, hungry sound. How much farther? Ada panted, stumbling to her knees. Not far, I lied. We're almost there. I pulled her to her feet. Her hand was ice cold in mine. We pushed on. That's when the first shot rang out. The bullet whined past my ear and smacked into the rock beside me, sending chips of granite flying. They were closer than I thought, and they had a rifleman with a good eye. Get down, I yelled, shoving Ada behind a snow-covered boulder. Another shot, then another. They had us pinned. They weren't trying to kill us, not yet. They were trying to hold us here until the main party could catch up. I risked a look over the boulder. Down below, maybe 400 yards, I could see them. 2 men. One was the rifleman. The other was the handler, holding the leash of a big black hound that was straining and barking, wild with our scent. This was it, the choke point. If we didn't get through the Needle's Eye now, we never would. Stay here, I told Ada. Don't move, no matter what. What are you going to do? Her eyes were wide with fear. Create a diversion. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. I'd spent 15 years learning the ways of the mountain, the way sound travels, the way a rock slide starts. I looked up. Above us, perched precariously on the cliff edge, was a massive cornice of snow, an overhang weighing tons, just waiting for the right vibration to let go. It was a crazy risk, a suicide mission. If I misjudged it, I'd bury us both. I took out my Colt. Cover your ears, I yelled to Ada. I fired once, twice, 3 times into the air. The crack of the pistol shots echoed and re-echoed through the canyon. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then a low groan, a sound like the world was tearing itself apart. The cornice fractured. A crack appeared, widened, and then the whole world seemed to fall. An avalanche. A river of white death, thundering down the mountainside, gathering speed and power, swallowing trees and rocks like they were pebbles. It wasn't aimed at the trackers, it was aimed at the slope between us and them. It wouldn't kill them, but it would cut them off. It would buy us the time we needed. I grabbed Ada's hand. Run! Now! We scrambled up the last few feet of the trail and through the Needle's Eye just as the avalanche roared past below us, filling the canyon with a deafening thunder and a cloud of snow so thick it blotted out the sun. We were safe, for the moment. We collapsed on the other side, gasping for air, our bodies screaming with exhaustion. From here, it was a short walk down into the hidden valley where my cabin sat. Home. Shelter. As we stumbled toward it, Ada looked at me, her face pale, her green eyes full of a dawning, terrifying respect. You're not just a mountain man, she breathed. You're something else. I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was that I'd just declared war on the most powerful men in Montana. I'd shown them I wouldn't be easy prey, and as we finally saw the thin curl of smoke rising from my cabin's chimney, I knew they would come for us. Not with 2 men and a dog. Next time, they would send an army. The cabin was more fortress than home. I'd built it myself, sinking the foundations deep, using logs so thick a rifle bullet wouldn't go through. It sat with its back to a sheer cliff face, impossible to attack from behind, with a clear field of fire across the meadow in front. For 15 years it had been my sanctuary. Now it was our Alamo. The warmth inside felt like a physical blow. Ada practically melted, slumping into the chair by the fire I'd banked before I left. I handed her a mug of whiskey. Drink it, I said. Slow. She took a sip, coughed, and took another. Color started to creep back into her cheeks. She looked around the cabin, taking it all in. The hand-hewn furniture, the shelves packed with preserved food, medicines, and books. The rifle rack on the wall. The small forge and anvil where I did my own blacksmithing. You built all this, she said. It wasn't a question. A man needs a place to stand his ground. As she warmed up, the story of the papers came pouring out of her. It was worse than I imagined. It wasn't just forged deeds. It was a systematic plundering of the territory. Hancock, Judge Frost, and a man named Colonel Marcus Bellingham, the head of the territorial militia, were at the center of it. They were a three-headed snake, poisoning everything they touched. They'd stolen claims from small-time prospectors, driven families off their land, and arranged accidents for anyone who fought back. The papers were a meticulous record of their crimes. Names, dates, bribes paid, a confession on paper. Bellingham, I said, the name leaving a bad taste in my mouth. He's the one who pushed for my conviction, called me a menace to civilized society. While he was robbing that society blind, Ada said, her voice filled with cold fury, the pieces were clicking into place. The injustice that had sent me to the mountains wasn't random. It was part of the same corrupt machine that had murdered Samuel Burslin. My past and her present were tangled together. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It had been my fight all along. I just hadn't known it. There's enough evidence in these papers to see them all hang, she said, touching the worn leather portfolio she'd carried all this way. If we can get it to an honest lawman, I said, and that's a mighty big if. We spent the next day preparing for a siege. I showed her the firing ports I'd built into the walls, hidden behind sliding panels. I showed her the root cellar with its hidden escape tunnel that led out into the rocks behind the cabin. I showed her every rifle, every pistol, and where I kept the ammunition. She was a quick study. She handled a revolver like she was born with it. My father taught me, she said. He told me a woman alone in this country needed to know how to defend herself. That night, a strange sort of peace settled over the cabin. The storm had passed. The world outside was silent, buried under a thick blanket of new snow. By the fire, we talked. I told her about the trial, about the lies, about choosing the mountains over a prison cell. She told me about the men she'd had to deal with on her run, 2 of them. One in Denver who thought she was for sale, and another in Billings who tried to collect the bounty the syndicate had put on her head. I'm not sorry for it, she said, meeting my eyes, daring me to judge her. Didn't ask you to be, I said. You do what you have to do to survive. Later, as I laid my bedroll by the fire, giving her the bed, she paused in the doorway to the small bedroom. Bram? Yeah? Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said, checking the action on my Winchester. They'll be coming. Once they dig out from that avalanche, they'll regroup. 3, maybe 4 days, they'll be sniffing around this valley. Then what do? We make them pay for every inch of ground, I said. Having another person in the cabin felt strange. Another heartbeat in the quiet. But it wasn't unwelcome. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't just surviving. I had someone to protect, a cause to fight for. It felt right. It felt dangerous. It felt like living again. But as I stared into the dying embers of the fire, a new chilling thought took root. Hancock and Bellingham weren't fools. They wouldn't send another small party of trackers. They knew what they were up against now. They'd send soldiers. They'd send the militia. They'd send Colonel Bellingham himself. And Bellingham knew these mountains. Not as well as I did, but well enough. He'd hunted here. He'd mapped these valleys for the territory. He knew where my cabin was. They weren't sniffing around. They weren't hunting. They knew exactly where we were. They were just waiting for the snow to clear enough to bring in an army. The quiet outside wasn't peace. It was the calm before the battle. The attack came at dawn on the 3rd day. It wasn't a reckless charge. It was a professional military operation. I was at a window watching the meadow when I saw the first sign of movement. Not a man, just a flicker of shadow against the trees, then another. "They're here," I said to Ada. She was already at the back window, a shotgun resting on the sill. They were ghosts, using the terrain, moving from cover to cover. These weren't the thugs from Cedar Flats. These were soldiers, Bellingham's men. "How many?" Ada whispered. "I count 10, I said, my eye scanning the tree line. "But there'll be more." The first shot wasn't aimed at the cabin. It was a signal. Immediately, a volley of rifle fire erupted from 3 sides, hammering against the log walls. Splinters flew inside, but the thick timber held. They were trying to pin us down, to make us keep our heads low. "They're trying to get close," I muttered, looking for a weak spot. A man made a dash from the trees toward the woodshed. He was fast, running in a low crouch. I drew a bead with my Sharps rifle, the big buffalo gun. I led him by a foot, squeezed the trigger. The rifle boomed, and the man was thrown backward into the snow, a dark stain spreading on his chest. A cheer almost went up from Ada, but I cut her off. "Don't get cocky. That was a test. They know where I am now." As if on cue, a hail of bullets slammed into the wall around my window, forcing me back. The morning turned into a nightmare of noise and smoke. They were smart. They kept moving, changing positions, never giving us a clean target for long. Ada's shotgun roared twice, stopping a man trying to rush the back door. The cabin filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. "Loading!" she yelled. I covered her, firing 2 quick shots from my Winchester to keep their heads down. They were good, disciplined, but they had one major disadvantage. They were attacking a fortress designed by a man who knew every rock, every tree, every dip in the ground. Then they changed tactics. "Bram! The stable!" Ada shouted. I moved to a side window. My heart sank. 2 men had reached the stable under covering fire. They were piling dry brush against the walls. My horses were in there. My mule. "Damn them!" I growled. I couldn't get a clear shot. A moment later, a torch arced through the air. The dry kindling went up with a whoosh. The stable became an inferno. I heard the horses screaming, a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days. They were being cruel, deliberately. They were trying to break our spirit. In the flickering light of the fire, I saw him, a man on a fine black horse, sitting just at the edge of the trees, watching. He was too far away to see clearly, but I knew. The arrogant set of his shoulders, the military posture, Colonel Marcus Bellingham. He had come himself. "Caldwell," his voice carried across the meadow, amplified by the cold, still air. "This is just the beginning. Send out the woman and the papers, and I'll let you walk away." "Liar," I shouted back. "I give you my word as an officer." "Your word is worth less than the powder it would take to send you to hell." I saw him make a sharp gesture to one of his men. A new threat was coming. "Ada," I said, my voice grim, "watch the roof." They had brought fire arrows. The first one thudded into the sod roof, smoldering. The second found dry thatch near the chimney and caught. A small flame began to lick at the shingles. We were trapped, pinned down by rifle fire, with our home burning around us. We used the water buckets we'd filled, dousing the flames as best we could, but it was a losing battle. The cabin was filling with smoke. We were coughing, our eyes streaming. It was over. We were going to burn. And then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A sound from my past. A sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. A high, ululating cry from the ridge behind the cabin. A war cry. Bellingham heard it too. I saw him turn in his saddle, his face a mask of confusion. From the trees on the high ridge, riders burst forth. Not soldiers, warriors, painted for battle, armed with rifles, moving with a speed and grace that made Bellingham's men look like clumsy children. It was Joe stands alone and his Paiute warriors. Joe, a man I had shared a fire with 2 winters ago. A man whose grandson I had helped save from lung fever with my knowledge of mountain herbs. A debt I had never asked to be repaid. They swept down from the ridge like a hawk diving on its prey, catching Bellingham's men completely by surprise, their flank exposed. Chaos erupted. Bellingham's disciplined soldiers broke and ran as the Paiute riders tore through their lines. It was our only chance. "The tunnel! Now!" I yelled to Ada. We scrambled into the root cellar, choking on the smoke. I heaved the heavy stone slab away from the tunnel entrance. "Go! I'm right behind you!" We crawled through the dark, narrow passage, the sounds of the battle fading behind us. We emerged into the cold, clean air behind the cabin, hidden among a jumble of massive boulders. My cabin, my home of 15 years, was a pillar of fire. Everything I owned was turning to ash. But we were alive, and we still had the papers. A militiaman fleeing the main fight stumbled right into us. He saw Ada, his eyes widened, and he raised his rifle. I didn't have time to think. I shot him from the hip. He fell without a sound. The fight between the militia and the Paiute wouldn't last long. Joe was creating a diversion, not starting a war. We had to use the time he was buying us. "This way," I said, pulling Ada toward the high trails. "We have to disappear." As we scrambled up the rocks, she looked back at the burning cabin, at the battle raging in the meadow. Then she looked at me, a question in her eyes. "Debts," I said, my voice hoarse. "In the mountains, a debt is always paid." But as we vanished into the deep timber, I knew we had just traded one trap for another. We were on foot with limited supplies in the dead of winter, and now we weren't just being hunted by a corrupt syndicate. We were fugitives from the territorial militia itself. Colonel Bellingham would paint us as killers, as allies of the savage Paiute. He wouldn't just hunt us now. He would raise the entire territory against us. There was nowhere left to run. For 2 days we moved through the harshest country I knew. We climbed ridges that would kill a careless man, crossed frozen rivers at night, and slept in snow caves, huddled together for warmth. We ate the last of the pemmican and drank melted snow. Ada was tougher than I could have imagined. She was exhausted, her face gaunt, but she never lost that fire. The injustice fueled her, kept her moving when her body wanted to quit. On the 3rd day, we were following a high game trail when we found the tracks. 3 men, on foot. They knew the mountains. Their tracks were careful, spaced out, showing none of the clumsiness of Bellingham soldiers. They were trackers, professionals, and they were fresh. "They're close," Ada whispered, her hand going to her revolver. "Too close," I said. "They've been paralleling us, waiting for us to get tired, to make a mistake." We were being herded, pushed toward a specific location. I looked around, reading the terrain. Ahead, the trail narrowed, passing through a tight canyon, an ambush point, a perfect kill box. We were caught. Going back meant running into them. Going forward meant walking into their trap. "What do we do?" Ada asked, her voice steady. She wasn't panicking. She was ready to fight. "The one thing they won't expect," I said. "We go up." I pointed to the sheer cliff face beside us. It was a madman's climb, a series of small ledges and cracks, slick with ice. A fall meant certain death. "Bram, we can't," she said, her eyes wide. "It's the only way." I went first, finding handholds, kicking footholds into the ice. "Put your hands and feet exactly where I do," I told her. The climb was a waking nightmare. The wind tore at us, trying to peel us off the rock. Our fingers grew numb. Every muscle screamed in protest. Below us, the canyon floor was a dizzying drop. Halfway up, my foot slipped. For a terrifying second, I dangled by my fingertips, my boots scrabbling for purchase. I heard Ada cry out. I found a hold, my muscles straining, and pulled myself back against the rock, my heart hammering against my ribs. We kept climbing. When we finally hauled ourselves over the top, we collapsed onto the windswept mesa, our lungs on fire. We had done it. We were above them. I crawled to the edge and looked down. I could see them now. 3 men moving into the kill box, their rifles ready. They were confused, searching for our tracks, which had simply vanished at the base of the cliff. One of them was the man with the scar from Cedar Flats. Farley. So he was a tracker too. I had my sharps. I could have ended it right there, taken all 3 of them out before they knew what was happening. My finger tightened on the trigger. Vengeance was a bitter, tempting taste in my mouth, but killing them in cold blood, even them, would make me the man they said I was. No, I whispered to myself. Not like this. Bram, look, Ada said, pointing. A rider was approaching the canyon from the other end. A single man on a tough-looking pinto. He was a mountain man dressed in buckskins. As he got closer, my breath caught in my throat. One Eye Creek, a trapper I'd known for 20 years. A man so grizzled the mountains themselves looked young next to him. Creek rode right up to the 3 trackers. Farley raised his rifle. Creek just spat a stream of tobacco juice and kept coming. They talked for a moment. I saw Farley get angry, gesturing. Creek just shook his head. Then impossibly, Farley and his men turned around and walked back the way they came. One Eye Creek had faced down 3 hired guns and made them back off without a shot fired. He looked up then, right at us, as if he knew we were there all along. He raised a hand. We climbed down. It was almost as hard as going up. Figured you could use a hand, Creek said when we reached him. His one good eye crinkled at the corners. Joe stands alone sent word. Said you were in a bad way. He sent me to guide you. Guide us where? I asked. North, he said. To the Milk River. To Canada. Canada. A place where Bellingham's warrants meant nothing. A place where we could be free. But the papers, Ada said. The people they hurt. You ain't no good to them dead, girl, Creek said gruffly. Live to fight another day. Get the story out from someplace safe. He was right. We had to survive first. Creek had brought food, blankets, and 2 more horses hidden in a nearby coulee. As we rode north, with Creek leading the way, I asked him, how did you get them to back down? Farley and his men? Creek grinned, showing the gaps in his teeth. Oh, that was simple. I told him the truth. Which was, I told him this was my territory, and that if a single hair on your head was harmed, I'd hunt them down. Not for money, for sport. He patted the stock of his rifle. Men like that, they understand a threat they can see, but what they fear is a man who'd do it for free. We rode hard for the border, but as the mountains began to recede behind us, replaced by the rolling plains, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. We were running again. We had escaped, but we hadn't won. We were leaving the fight behind. That night, as we camped by a frozen stream, Ada pulled out the papers. We looked at them by the light of a small, smokeless fire. The names of the victims, the families ruined. And then I saw it. A name on a forged deed from 16 years ago. A prospector named Hayes. His claim had been stolen, and then he'd been framed for the murder of Judge Thornton, the very crime they had pinned on me. It was all connected. My entire life as an exile was based on a lie fabricated by the same men we were running from. I can't go to Canada, I said, my voice low and hard as granite. I'm not running anymore. Ada looked at me, her eyes reflecting the fire. What then? We're going to Fort Benton, I said. There's a deputy U.S. Marshal there, James Henderson. They say he's the last honest man in the territory. One Eye Creek looked at me like I was crazy. That's suicide, Bram. You're riding straight back into the snake pit. Maybe, I said, folding the papers carefully, but this snake has a head, and I'm going to cut it off. Ada put her hand on mine. She corrected me. We're going to cut it off. The hunt was over. Now the hunters were about to become the hunted. Fort Benton was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The town was crawling with Hancock's men, freight haulers on his payroll, gunslicks looking for easy money. Walking into that town felt like sticking my head in a noose. We met Henderson in his office above the freight company. He was a man who looked tired of the world, but not yet defeated by it. His eyes were sharp, and they missed nothing. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just let Ada lay out the whole story, spreading the papers on his desk one by one. I watched his face. It was a mask of professional calm, but I could see a muscle tightening in his jaw. When she was finished, he was silent for a full minute. He just stared at the proof of the poison that was killing his territory. "I've heard rumors," he said finally, his voice a low growl. "Whispers. Never had anything solid enough to move on." He looked at the papers. "This is more than solid. This is an earthquake." He looked from Ada to me. "But they know you have these. They know you're here. This town is a trap." He was right. But then he did something I never expected. He opened a drawer, pulled out a star-shaped badge, and slid it across the desk to me. "Raise your right hand, Caldwell." "What?" I was stunned. "I'm deputizing you," he said. "A temporary federal appointment. As long as you're acting under my orders, you've got immunity from any territorial warrants. It's a flimsy shield, but it's better than nothing." So I took the oath. Me, Bram Caldwell, a wanted man, wearing a U.S. Marshal's badge. The irony was so thick you could choke on it, but as I pinned it to my coat, I saw the look in Ada's eyes. It was pride. "Now," Henderson said, all business, "we need to get these papers and Miss Merritt to Helena. There's a federal prosecutor there, Marcus Wade. He's one of the few men I trust to see this through. I'll gather my most trusted deputies. We ride at dawn." But we didn't have until dawn. When we walked out of his office, they were waiting for us at the bottom of the stairs. Farley, and this time he had a dozen men with him. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Farley sneered, his eyes locking on Ada. He held up a piece of paper. "I've got a territorial warrant here for one Ada Merritt, for theft, and for the murder of my colleague, Jonas Cutter." It was a setup. They'd killed their own man and were pinning it on her. "That warrant is worthless, Farley, and you know it," Henderson said, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "Maybe," Farley said, his men spreading out, blocking the street. "But it's enough to let me take her. A territorial judge will sort it out, and we all know how that will go." The street went quiet. Townspeople scattered, diving for cover. This was it, a bloodbath in the middle of Fort Benton. And then Ada did the bravest thing I've ever seen. "I'll go," she said. "Ada, no." I started forward, but she put a hand on my arm. "It's all right, Bram," she said, her voice calm. "They won't hurt me, not as long as they think I'm the only one who knows where the originals of those papers are." Henderson saw the play immediately. "She's right," he said, his voice booming for all to hear. "And those papers are now evidence in a federal investigation. They've been logged, sealed, and are on their way to Washington. Killing her won't stop this. It will only bring the full weight of the U.S. government down on you." It was a magnificent bluff. The papers were still in the portfolio in my hands. Farley hesitated. Doubt flickered in his eyes. He didn't know whether to call the bluff or not. In that moment of hesitation, Henderson pressed his advantage. "So I suggest you and your men make yourselves scarce before I decide to arrest all of you for obstruction of justice." Farley stared at him, then at me, my badge glinting in the afternoon sun. He was outmaneuvered. He spat on the ground. "This isn't over, Marshal," he snarled. "My part in it is," Henderson said coldly. "Get out of my town." They left, but we all knew it was just a temporary retreat. "They know we're going to Helena," I said to Henderson. "They'll be waiting for us on the road." "I know," he said, "and that's why we're not going to try to be clever. We're not sneaking. We're riding straight down the main road, bold as brass. Sometimes the most direct path is the safest." He assembled his team. 3 deputies, Pratt, Vasquez, and a young, eager deputy named Young. They were hard men, and they looked ready for a fight. We rode out the next morning. 5 deputies and 1 brave woman against a private army. The odds weren't good. The ambush came 20 miles out of town. They were waiting for us at a stagecoach station, hidden in the rocks and in the station itself. It was a perfectly executed trap. Gunfire erupted from all sides. Deputy Young went down in the first volley, his horse screaming. Chaos. Horses rearing, guns barking. We were surrounded. I stayed close to Ada, shielding her with my body, firing my Winchester until the barrel was hot. Henderson and his men were fighting like cornered wolves, but we were outnumbered, outgunned. A rider broke from cover, charging straight for Ada, trying to grab her reins. I shot him out of the saddle. Another took his place. We were going to be overwhelmed. And then, a bugle call, clear and sharp, cutting through the din of the gunfight. Over the rise, a column of blue-coated soldiers appeared. A full platoon of U.S. cavalry, their guidons snapping in the wind. They charged. Farley's men, caught between us and the cavalry, broke and fled. The ambush had turned into a rout. The young lieutenant in charge rode up to Henderson. "Colonel Miles sends his compliments, Marshal. He received your telegraph. Said it sounded like you could use an escort to Helena." Henderson, bleeding from a graze on his arm, grinned. "Your timing is impeccable, Lieutenant." He had bluffed again. The telegraph was another masterstroke of deception. We rode toward Helena in the center of a hollow square of cavalry troopers. For the first time in weeks, we could breathe. But I knew this wasn't the end. We had won the battle, but the war was waiting for us in Helena. We were taking the fight to their home ground, to the courts they owned, the city they ran. Farley and his men were just the pawns. The king and the queen were still on the board, and they were about to be cornered. That's when the game gets deadliest. Helena wasn't just a city, it was a monument to the power of the Hancock Syndicate. The bank, the land office, the finest hotel, all bore his name or the mark of his influence. The courthouse itself, a grand limestone building, felt like enemy territory. Our prosecutor, Marcus Wade, was a surprise. He was young, sharp as a razor, and he moved with the restless energy of a man who believed in the law like a religion. He looked at the papers, at Ada, at me, and a fire lit in his eyes. "This," he said, his voice trembling with a lawyer's righteous fury, "is how we take our country back." The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed every day with Hancock supporters and the curious townsfolk who wanted to see the Titans fall. Bellingham was there in his full-dress uniform, arrogant and defiant. Hancock looked bored, as if this was all just an inconvenient delay in his business. Wade was brilliant. He built his case brick by brick, using the papers to lay a foundation of irrefutable fact. Forgery, bribery, theft. Then Ada took the stand. She was magnificent. She didn't cry or waver. She spoke with a clear, steady voice, telling the court about Samuel Breslin, about the papers, about the night he was murdered. She pointed at Bellingham and Hancock. "They killed him," she said, her voice ringing with truth. "They killed him because he was going to expose them." Their lawyer, a slick man named Thornberry, tried to tear her apart on cross-examination. He called her a liar, a thief, a scorned mistress. She met every attack with quiet dignity and unshakable facts. I testified next about the chase, the siege on my cabin, the ambush on the road. "Mr. Caldwell," Thornberry sneered, "is it not true that you are a convicted murderer?" Before I could answer, Wade was on his feet. "Your Honor, if the defense wishes to re-examine Mr. Caldwell's conviction, I would be happy to introduce evidence proving that the key witness in that trial was paid with stock from the Hancock Mining Syndicate, and that Judge Thornton, the man he was accused of killing, was the first judge on their payroll." The courtroom exploded. Thornberry went pale. He had walked right into Wade's trap. The jury saw it all. The whole rotten system laid bare. The final nail in their coffin was a surprise witness, a mousy young woman who had been Josiah Hancock's private bookkeeper. She walked to the stand, terrified but determined, and she told the court about a second set of ledgers, the real ones, hidden in a secret safe in Hancock's office. That night, Henderson and his deputies, armed with a federal warrant, tore Hancock's office apart and found the ledgers. The next day, Wade presented them to the court. It was a complete anatomy of the syndicate's corruption. Every bribe, every hired gun, every murdered prospector. It was all there, in black and white. The verdict was a formality, guilty. on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Hancock screamed about appeals. Bellingham sat ramrod straight, his face a mask of cold fury, his military career, his life turning to ash around him. As they were being led away in chains, Bellingham locked eyes with me. It was a look that promised a war was not over, that it had just begun. Outside, the city was in an uproar. People were celebrating in the streets. We had done it. The giants had fallen. Wade was ecstatic. This changes everything. We've broken them. But as he spoke, I noticed that Farley, who had been watching from the back of the courtroom, was gone. So were a dozen other hard-faced men who had been with him. Henderson, I said, my voice low. Trouble. The shot came from a rooftop across the street. It was an assassination attempt, right on the courthouse steps, a desperate final act of a dying beast. Henderson went down, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted. People screamed and ran for cover. More shots rang out, from alleyways, from second-story windows. It was a coordinated ambush, Farley's last stand. I grabbed Ada, tackling her behind a stone water trough as bullets chipped away at our cover. The courthouse steps became a killing ground. Federal marshals returned fire, but we were caught in a crossfire. "We have to move!" I yelled over the gunfire. "The hotel! Now!" We ran. A bullet tore through the sleeve of my coat. Another sparked off the cobblestones at Ada's feet. We dove through the hotel doors just as a fresh volley of shots splintered the wood frame. They were in the hotel. We could hear them on the floors above, coming for us. "The fire escape!" Ada shouted. We scrambled out the window of our room onto the rickety iron platform. Just as we did, the door to our room burst open. Farley. His face was a twisted mask of hate, his pistol smoking. "Nowhere left to run," he snarled. I shoved Ada behind me and fired my Colt. We both fired at the same time. His bullet burned a line of fire across my ribs. Mine took him square in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face, and fell. We clambered down the fire escape, bullets ringing off the iron around us. We hit the alley running, straight into 3 more of his men. There was no time for thought, only instinct. I shot 2 of them before they could even raise their guns. The third dove for cover. We burst out onto the main street. The battle was over. Farley's men were dead, captured, or fleeing. The U.S. cavalry, summoned from their barracks, had arrived and restored order. It was finished. Truly finished. Later that day, cleaned and bandaged, I found Ada on the balcony of our new hotel room. She was watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of orange and purple. "So," she said, not looking at me, "what now?" My old life was gone, burned to the ground. Her old life was avenged. We were both standing on the edge of a new, unknown frontier. Henderson offered me a permanent position, I said, a full-time deputy marshal. "You'd make a good one," she said quietly. "A lawman who understands what it's like to be on the other side." "Maybe," I said, "but I think I'm done fighting. I spent 15 years surviving. I'd like to try living for a while." She finally turned to look at me, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "And where would you do that?" I looked past her, at the mountains that had been my prison and my sanctuary. They weren't a place to hide anymore. They were home. "I was thinking of rebuilding my cabin," I said, "bigger this time, with 2 chairs by the fire." I met her eyes. "Maybe a room for grinding herbs and making medicines. For a healer." Her smile widened. "A healer might get lonely up there by herself." "Well," I said, my heart feeling fuller than it had in 15 years. She wouldn't have to be. The war was over. Justice had been served. But standing there with the woman who had walked through fire with me, I knew that the real victory wasn't about watching evil men go to jail. It was about what came next. The quiet work of building something new, something good, something that couldn't be bought or stolen or burned to the ground. Something like a home. And if you enjoyed this story of justice on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Bram and Ada's journey. Until next time, stay safe out there.